Hello everybody and welcome to a video on niche sports. I'm a big fan of niche sports in video games. While everybody knows my favorite genres are Japanese RPGs, Japanese fighting games, and pretty much everything else from Japan, something I think that people aren't quite so aware of with me is just how much I do enjoy my sports games. And while I enjoy the big blockbuster experiences of FIFA and NBA and NHL and all of those ones, I'm also a big fan of niche sports, and I like playing niche sports in real life. I'm a big fan of lacrosse and tennis and cricket. For people who aren't Australian or part of the old Commonwealth, cricket it's like baseball, but you bounce the ball. And I like bike riding, and that kind of led me, I guess, to playing this new Tour de France game. Funnily enough, I haven't actually played a Tour de France game before, and the reason is I couldn't mentally imagine how it would work as a video game. Because for anybody who's watched the Tour de France knows, it's a full day's worth of riding, and the idea of actually taking a team across, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of kilometers, and it just kind of felt to me like it was going to be this slow-paced F1 game where rather than high-powered sports cars, you're instead driving a dude around on a dinky bike. But what actually this game is it's much more strategic and much more simulation-like than a sports game, to the point where a lot of the time you're not actually racing. A lot of the time you get behind one of these races here and press a single button and you just kind of sit behind them, and from there you control the rest of your team. And that, of course, is exactly how Tour de France actually works. Tour de France it looks like an individual sport, but actually it's a sport of teamwork, where you are in a team of a number of riders, and then you need to work together to conserve each other's energy across an entire race, so that at the end of it you can still sprint, and that's how you get to win the race. And it's not easy by any means. In addition to being good in endurance, you need to be really good with your timing. When you need to know when to attack and try and break away from the crowd. You need to know when to sit back and conserve energy, and all of those kinds of things. There's a lot that goes into winning a race of Tour de France. A lot of people think that you just cycle really hard and take some performance-enhancing drugs, and you'll be right. But actually, the sport is a lot more complex than that. And it's not one that you immediately think could possibly work as a sports game. But Tour de France really does work as a sports game. It's not a sports game in the same sense of FIFA or NHL or whatever, where you take direct control of your player or team, and then you're responsible for everything that kind of happens on the field. And while there's data crunching going on in the background, it kind of feels sometimes superficial to what's happening. And while a player might have a good rating, that just means they're slightly easier to use on the field. Whereas with Tour de France, it feels like it's a little bit more like, a soccer manager game in some ways, a football manager game, where you need to carefully consider how every little piece of statistics on each of your players can be used and eked out to the maximum effect. So for anybody who hasn't watched a Tour de France game before, what happens is there's usually one of the races, the strongest racer in the team is the lead racer, and then the other 7 racers on the team are kind of backups. And their job is to help conserve the energy of the lead racer so that he can really sprint at the end, and he's still got most of his energy despite having ridden 300 odd kilometers already. He's already got most of his energy, and he can really sprint at the end and get the victory for the overall team. How that plays out in Tour de France is through a lot of kind of menu stuff. So at any point you can pause the game, bring up a menu, and you can issue tactics for every single one of your players on your team, whether that is to hang back and conserve some energy of their own because you want to use them a bit later on down the race, or to try to break away from the group, and you can then tag along and try to take a leadership position within the race, or to simply hold pace with the team and then let you sit behind, and then you create this big group, and then everybody in the group works off one another to try to catch the leaders. So Tour de France works with 2 different kind of groups. There's the leadership group. Every race always has a leadership group. It's usually 5 or 6 racers that really sprint from the start and try to get out in front, and from there they work together, conserving one another's energy, taking turns to be the leader, and so on, so that they stay in the leadership position, while everybody else in the race, and we're talking about dozens of racers, sit back in a big group, and they all work together again to, one racer will take the lead, and then some others will drop back, and then it'll swap over, and so on. And then those racers' job is to catch the leader. Now, when I keep saying that you preserve energy and so on, it's because of it seems like it should be a minor effect, but it actually has a huge impact. There's a drag on whoever's on the front because they're pushing through air, and because they're pushing through air, it obviously takes more energy to move forwards. Whoever's sitting immediately behind them doesn't have to push through anywhere near as much air. It's already been separated for them. So physically, it's actually much easier to be just behind a lead racer. So when there's a breakaway team, for example, when the team's at the very front of the race and there's 6 or 7 players, racers working together, one will take the lead and then some of the others will kind of sit back behind them so they can conserve some energy. And then when that racer is tired, the next one will take their turn and all of that kind of stuff. And through that, you can actually race at a much faster pace for a lot longer than you would in a normal than you would if you were kind of racing by yourself. And that's why when you watch the Tour de France, if you're not that familiar with the sport, it can seem really weird because it can seem like all these racers are kind of just sitting there and working together, and they're even talking to each other, they're indicating to each other, they're actually building tactics as they race, rather than just try and pelt ahead and win, because you couldn't possibly keep up enough energy across hundreds and hundreds of kilometers to still be sprinting at the end, basically. And that is where Tour de France, the video game, does such an amazing job. It's when I first started to play it, once again, I wasn't really sure what to expect. I was expecting kind of a slow take on FIFA or whatever, but that dissipated very quickly when I realised that most of the game I'll be there pressing the square button and holding the square button and just sitting behind the racer, waiting for my moment to attack, waiting for my chance to take the leadership role, waiting for my team to catch up, directing them to save some energy, directing them on what to do, timing my sprints, watching out for where there'll be a windy area which makes it harder to ride through, watching out for those moments within the race where you can sprint to a midway kind of finish to earn an extra point or two for your team. So all of that was stuff I needed to start thinking about. And you don't need to think so much about the action of the race itself. There's no crashes, you can't go off the road, and all of that kind of stuff. While none of that's in it, this game is it's a very contemplative game. It takes a lot of effort and concentration if you want to be really good at it. And of course, we are talking about races that last in the hours. Tour de France is famous for the races not exactly being short in the length of time that it takes for the bike riders to get through the whole track. And again, that's kind of part of the joy of playing this game, is that you actually get a full simulation of the massive courses that they race across. It is condensed slightly so that rather than a whole day thing for a single race, it'll only take you a couple of hours. But even then, it's still really, really impressive about how the developers have managed to somehow render an entire race. And we're not talking about laps like you would with FIFA or any other racing game. We are talking about an end-to-end single race across a single track, and with a start and finish. And somehow, I don't even know how they have done it, given that it's kind of an indie team without huge resources. Somehow they've actually managed to render the entire race, where there's no loading screens, there's no pauses in the middle of it. You can go from one end to the other in a couple of hours and actually have the full race experience, which is just amazing. It's really impressive, especially when it looks good. I mean, it's not the most exciting visually game. It's not it's not perfect. It's not big budget or whatever, but it looks quite impressive. And as anybody who's watched the Tour de France knows, part of the joy of the game or the event is to watch the scenery as well and admire just how beautiful France is. But this one, and this one again recreates that. There's a real joy to cycling past the vineyards, or working your way across these kind of cobblestone roads and stuff like that. That's all there, and that's all part of the experience of the game as well. So it's really impressive how visually effective the developers have been able to be across such huge track lengths. And again, I don't know how they did it, because they don't have huge budgets, but they did it, and it's really impressive. And of course, I should mention, you don't have to play the entire race in one go. You can actually save at any point and kind of drop out and then come back, a day or two later and pick up your race where you were at. So, if you start to feel mentally fatigued, or you just need a break, you can do that and come back to this game, which is pretty important, I find. And the other great thing about it is it has co-op, and working together with another player in a game, in a sporting event, which is fundamentally about working with one another, is a really enjoyable experience, because again, you'll talk tactics with your mate. It's the moments where the action's too fast to really kind of concentrate about anything else but button mashing is basically at the end of the course. So for the most part, you do have that time to sit back and think and carefully work out what strategy you're doing. If you're in the back group, you can work out when you need to attack the breakaway group. When you're in the breakaway group, you can work out how to keep building that distance between yourselves and the peloton. So that co-op, this is a really good co-op game, and I really recommend it for people who enjoy their sports co-op as well. Anyway, this is a video that's not about anything to do with Japanese games, and I know that's usually what I talk about on my channel, but I do like niche games, and this is my first Tour de France game, and I can't believe it's taken me this long to actually play one. I highly recommend it to anybody who actually likes sports games or something a little bit different.